Like a long, lonely stream, I keep rushing towards a dream, moving on, moving on. I'm not nervous now. When that song came out in 1966, I was a 13-year-old kid in Flint, Michigan, and I loved electronics, okay? I also had this love-hate relationship with something called a scientific method. We won't talk about that. But when I was in high school, I managed to be a finalist in something called the Flint Area Science Fair. My project dealt with the effects of gamma radiation on transistors and their related RF oscillators. But if you look at that picture, you notice I don't look very happy. I was pissed because I came in second. But when I was in high school, I knew, this was in the 60s, remember, there were two powerful movements going on in the country at that time. One of them was obvious, the civil rights movement. Millions of people across this country came together to press for equal rights and greater opportunities for everybody. And I was very aware of that as a kid growing up in Flint in those days. But there was another movement that was taking place that actually began with these three guys in 1947. William Shockley, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, three guys at a place called Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, invented the transistor. And the transistor led to the integrated circuit. The integrated circuit led to the microcomputer and to these devices that we all have in our pockets these days. So I was aware of these two movements in high school, and I was an ambitious kid. So I wanted to combine these two movements and fuel my career. But I looked at it in those days as an experiment because it wasn't clear. I didn't know. I never had seen anyone do what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was to start my own electronics manufacturing company. While I was in college at University of Michigan, before that Bell Labs, before that General Motors Institute, I stumbled upon a concert. This was actually at GMI up in Flint one night. It was an electronic music concert, and it was performed on something called a Moog electronic music synthesizer. This is an album from those days, Switched on Bach. But I sat there listening to that concert, and I was just transfixed by this combination of art and science and engineering and music. And I said, that's what my company is going to do. I'm going to build electronic music synthesizers. It didn't hurt that my musical hero, the guy who sang that song I came out singing, Stevie Wonder, was also into electronic music synthesizers. And he had just come out with this album called Talking Book, on which he made extensive use of electronic music synthesizers. So I was ready to go. This was going to be my thing. I happened to go to work at a place called Bell Laboratories in New Jersey after college, the very company that invented the transistor. And I went there because it was the top electronics research and development company in the world at that time. And I wanted to go there and spend a few years, get the experience I needed to start a company, and then go do it. Well, while I was there, I found that my synthesizer idea just wasn't going to fly because I had never gone out and talked to, guess who, musicians about this synthesizer. So I spent 3 or 4 years building this elaborate digital electronic music synthesizer, and when I showed it to some musicians, they panned it. So that idea died a horrible death while I was at Bell Labs. But while I was there, I was able to apply that same technology to another device that I saw the need for while I was working at Bell Labs. And this device was a simulator. It actually simulated the characteristics of the telephone network and used much of the same kinds of design work that I had done for the synthesizer. So I started working in my home, in my basement, to develop this music synthesizer. And you know, when you work at home, it's not pretty. A lot of times, you know, at least I had hair, but it was pretty messed up. And, you know, I'm not going to talk about my breath. But, you know, I was persistent about developing this electronic simulator for the telephone network. And I managed to recruit a couple of guys from Bell Labs to work with me on this project. So we spent 2 years in my basement after work, on weekends, developing this telephone network simulator. And finally, after those 2 years, I left Bell Labs and went into the basement. And then these two guys, who had just gotten married months earlier, left Bell Labs, their prestigious jobs at Bell Labs, and came to work in Crazy Dave's basement. By the way, the guy on the left is Stephen Moore, and the guy in the middle is Charles Simmons. This was our prototype of our first product. Beautiful, isn't it? This was a device that contained about 9 microcomputers and some special purpose digital signal processing hardware and software, and it was beautiful to us. This was the thing that was going to take us forward. But after a few months of industrial design work, this is what the actual finished product looked like. It was called the TAS-1010 Channel Simulator. TAS stood for Telecom Analysis Systems, the name of our company. And this product costs about $16,000 and up. Well, our first year in business was tough. We almost didn't make it. But we managed to survive that first year, and then things kind of took off. So we expanded our sales area. We ended up selling to most of the major telecommunications manufacturers in the country. We expanded our product offerings to other kinds of devices for simulating other kinds of telephone networks. And so we were off and running. We also expanded to other countries. We started selling our products in other places, and we eventually expanded to 25 countries. And Japan was our largest export market. This picture is taken from my first visit there in 1987. And, you know, there were some pretty dark-skinned guys in Japan. That's me in the middle, in case you... In 1995, we sold the company. And we sold it to a British company. And I felt pretty good that day because I was realizing a promise that I made to these two guys when I recruited them from Bell Labs. I had told them, come in my basement, work with me on this project, and we'll all be millionaires someday. I didn't believe it for a minute. But on that day, it actually happened, and it felt really good. So, what did we prove? We proved that it was possible for 3 guys like us to go into the basement and start a company from nothing. We had no angel investor. We had no venture capital. We had no contracts. We did this thing, you know, the old school way. So that was one of the things that we proved. But the main thing is that, you know, I was, as a kid, just wanting to know if this was possible, if things had changed enough in the country to make what we did possible. And so the most gratifying thing was, yes, we found that it's possible, and that means it's possible for anybody. So today, this company that we started, as of last year, they did well over $100 million in sales. And the cumulative sales, as of this summer, exceeded $1 billion. So We're happy and proud about what we did, but mainly, we had a great group of employees, still have a great group of people there, and people who we saw, they basically grew up with the company, and that was a gratifying thing. People often ask me all the time, I have this idea, what should I do? And I tell them a very simple thing. Somebody else said it earlier. Get started, do something, okay? Often we think about things for a long time. We have an idea and we just think about it. Or else we'll rush impulsively in to start doing it, the way I did with that music synthesizer. But, there's a step in between. There's tinkering and asking questions and exploring and researching. And today, to do that is easier than it's ever been, especially with the advent of Google. In terms of getting started, I had a great role model. My father served in World War II. He was in the Army. He was a radio operator in the Aleutian Islands. And when he came back from the Army to Georgia, where he was from, and then he and my mother migrated to Flint, he couldn't find a job in electronics, even though he loved electronics. It was a different time, okay? But he didn't let that stop him. He built an electronics workshop in our basement. He worked there by night while he worked at the post office as a postman and then a technician by day. And he had books around the house, books on transistors and vacuum tubes and lasers and other kinds of things. So all of that rubbed off on me. So the fact that my father went out there and took a step, he didn't know where it was going to lead. He was just doing what he loved, what he was passionate about. But I saw him doing that, and that rubbed on me. And because he took that step, it enabled me to do what I did. So I always say to people, get started. You don't know who's watching or where it's going to go. Thank you very much.